Story 2 of In Exile and Other Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Wales. In Exile and Other Stories by Mary Hallock Foote. Story 2, Friend Barton's Concern, Part 1. It had been borne in upon him, more or less, during the long winter. It had not relaxed when the frosts unlocked their hold and the streams were set free from their long winter's silence among the hills. He grew restless and abstracted under the turning of the Lord's hand upon him, and his speech unconsciously shaped itself into the biblical cadences which came to him in his moments of spiritual exercise. The bedrabbled snows of March shrank away before the keen, quickening sunbeams. The hills emerged, brown and sodden, like the chrysalis of the new year. The streams woke in a tumult, and all day and night their voices called from the hills back of the mill. The waste weir was a foaming torrent, and spread itself in muddy shallows across the meadow, beyond the old garden where the robins and bluebirds were house hunting. Friend Barton's trouble stirred with the life-blood of the year, and pressed upon him sorely, but as yet he gave it no words. He plodded about among his lean kine, tempering the winds of March to his untimely lambs, and reconciling unnatural ewes to their maternal duties. Friend Barton had never heard of the doctrine of the survival of the fittest, though it was the spring of 1812, and England and America were investigating the subject on the seas, while the nations of Europe were practically illustrating it. The hospital tent, as the boys called an old corn basket covered with carpet, which stood beside the kitchen chimney, was seldom without an occupant, a brood of chilled chickens, a weakly lamb, or a wee pig, with too much blue in its pinkness, that had been left behind by its stouter brethren in the race for existence. The old mill hummed away through the day, and often late into the evening, if time pressed, upon the grists which added a thin, intermittent stream of tribute to the family income. Whenever work was slack, Friend Barton was sawing or chopping in the woodshed adjoining the kitchen. Every moment he could seize or make he was there, stooping over the rapidly growing pile. "Seems to me, father, thee's in a great hurry with the wood this spring. I don't know when we've had such a pile ahead." "'Twon't burn up any faster for being chopped," Friend Barton said, and then his wife Rachel knew that if he had a reason for being forehanded with the wood, he was not ready to give it. One rainy April afternoon, when the smoky gray distances began to take a tinge of green, and through the drip and rustle of the rain the call of the robins sounded, Friend Barton sat in the door of the barn, oiling the road harness. The old chaise had been wheeled out and greased, and its cushions beaten and dusted. An ox team with a load of grain creaked up the hill and stopped at the mill door. The driver, seeing Friend Barton's broad-brimmed drab felt hat against the dark interior of the barn, came down the short lane leading from the mill, past the house and farm buildings. "Fixin' up for travelling, Uncle Tommy?" Vain compliments, such as worldly titles of Mr. and Mrs., were unacceptable to Thomas Barton, and he was generally known and addressed as Uncle Tommy by the world's people of a younger generation. "It is not in man that walketh to direct his own steps, neighbor Jordan. I am getting myself in readiness to obey the Lord, whichever way he shall call me." Farmer Jordan cast a shrewd eye over the premises. They wore that patient, sad, exhumed look which old farm buildings are apt to have in early spring. The roofs were black with rain, and brightened with patches of green moss. Farmer Jordan instinctively calculated how many bunches of shingle would be required to rescue them from the decline into which they had fallen, indicated by these hectic green spots. "Wal, The Lord calls most of us to stay at home and look after things, such weather as this. Good plantin' weather, good weather for breaking ground, fust-rate weather for milling. This is a reg'lar miller's reign, Uncle Tommy. You'd ought to be taking advantage of it. I've got a grist back here. Wish you could manage to let me have it when I come back from store." The grist was ground and delivered before Friend Barton went in to his supper that night. Dorothy Barton had been mixing bread, and was wiping her white arms and hands on the roller towel by the kitchen door, as her father stamped and scraped his feet on the stones outside. "There! I do believe I forgot to toll neighbor Jordan's rye," he said, as he gave a final rub on the broom Dorothy handed out to him. "It's wonderful how careless I get." "Well, father, I don't suppose thee'd ever forget and toll a grist twice." "I believe I've been mostly preserved from mistakes of that kind," said Friend Barton gently. "Well, well, to be sure," he continued musingly, "it may be the Lord who stays my hand from gathering profit unto myself while his lambs go unfed." Dorothy put her hands on her father's shoulders. She was almost as tall as he, and could look into his patient, troubled eyes. "Father, I know what thee is thinking of, but do think long. It will be a hard year. The boys ought to go to school, and mother is so feeble." Friend Barton's concern kept him awake that night. His wife watched by his side, giving no sign, lest her wakeful presence should disturb his silent wrestlings. The tall cherry-wood clock in the entry measured the hours as they passed, with its slow, dispassionate tick. At 2 o'clock Rachel Barton was awakened from her first sleep of weariness by her husband's voice, whispering heavily in the darkness. "My way is hedged up. I see no way to go forward. Lord, strengthen my patience, that I murmur not, after all I have seen of thy goodness. I find daily bread is very desirable. Want and necessity are painful to nature. But shall I follow thee for the sake of the loaves, or will it do to forsake thee in times of emptiness and abasement?" There was silence again, and restless tossings and sighings continued the struggle. "Thomas," the wife's voice spoke tremulously in the darkness, "my dear husband, I know whither thy thoughts are tending. If the Spirit is with thee, do not deny it for our sakes, I pray thee. The Lord did not give thee thy wife and children to hang as a millstone round thy neck. I am thy helpmeet, to strengthen thee in his service. I am thankful that I have my health this spring better than usual, and Dorothy is a wonderful help. Her spirit was sent to sustain me in thy long absences. Go, dear, and serve our Master, who has called thee in these bitter strivings. Dorothy and I will keep things together as well as we can. The way will open, never fear." She put out her hand and touched his face in the darkness. There were tears on the furrowed cheeks. "Try to sleep, dear, and let thy spirit have rest. There is but one answer to this call." With the first drowsy twitterings of the birds, when the crescent-shaped openings in the board shutters began to define themselves clearly in the shadowy room, they arose and went about their morning tasks in silence. Friend Barton's step was a little heavier than usual, and the hollows round his wife's pale brown eyes were a little deeper. As he sat on the splint-bottomed chair by the kitchen fireplace, drawing on his boots, she placed her hands on his shoulders and touched with her cheek the worn spot on the top of his head. "Thee will lay this concern before meeting to morrow, father?" "I had it on my mind to do so, if my light be not quenched before then." Friend Barton's light was not quenched. Words came to him without seeking, a sure sign that the Spirit was with him, in which to open the concern that had ripened in his mind, of a religious visit to the meeting constituting the yearly meetings of Philadelphia and Baltimore. A minute was given him, encouraging him in the name, and with the full concurrence, of the monthly meetings of 9 Partners and Stony Valley, to go wherever the truth might lead him. While friend Barton was thus freshly anointed and abundantly encouraged, his wife Rachel was talking with Dorothy in the low upper chamber known as the wheel room. Dorothy was spinning wool on the big wheel, dressed in her light calico short gown and brown quilted petticoat. Her arms were bare, and her hair was gathered away from her flushed cheeks and knotted behind her ears. The roof sloped down on one side, and the light came from a long, low window under the eaves. There was another window, shaped like a half moon, high up in the peak, but it sent down only one long beam of sunlight, which glimmered across the dust and fell upon Dorothy's white neck. The wheel was humming a quick measure, and Dorothy trod lightly back and forth, the wheel pin in one hand, the other holding the tense, lengthening thread, which the spindle devoured again. "Dorothy, thee looks warm. Can't thee sit down a moment while I talk to thee?" "Is it anything important, mother? I want to get to my 20 knots before dinner." She paused as she joined a long tress of wool at the spindle. "Is it anything about father?" "Yes, it's about father, and all of us." "I know," said Dorothy with a sigh. "He's going away again." "Yes, dear, he feels that he is called. It is a time of trouble and contention everywhere. The harvest truly is plenteous, but the laborers are few." "There are not so many laborers here, mother, though, to be sure, the harvest—" "Dorothy, my daughter, don't let a spirit of levity creep into thy speech. Thy father has striven and wrestled with his urgings. I've seen it working on him all winter. He feels now it is the Lord's will." "I don't see how he can be so sure," said Dorothy, swaying gloomily to and fro against the wheel. "I don't care for myself. I'm not afraid of work, but thee's not able to do what thee does now, mother. If I have outside things to look after, how can I help thee as I should? And the boys are about as much dependence as a flock of barn swallows." "Don't thee fret about me, dear. The way will open. Thy father has thought and planned for us. Have patience while I tell thee. Thee knows that Walter Evesham's pond is small, and his mill is doing a thriving business?" "Yes, indeed, I know it," Dorothy exclaimed. "He has his own share, and ours too, most of it." "Wait, dear, wait. Thy father has rented him the ponds to use when his own gives out. He is to have the control of the water, and it will give us a little income, even though the old mill does stand idle." "He may as well take the mill too. If father is away all summer, it will be useless ever to start it again. Thee'll see, mother, how it will end, if Walter Evesham has the custom and the water all summer. I think it's miserable for a young man to be so keen about money." "Dorothy, seems to me thee's hasty in thy judgments. I never heard that said of Walter Evesham. His father left him with capital to improve his mill. It does better work than ours. We can't complain of that. Thy father was never one to study much after ways of making money. He felt he had no right to more than an honest livelihood. I don't say that Walter Evesham's in the wrong. We know that Joseph took advantage of his opportunities, though I can't say that I ever felt much unity with some of his transactions. What would thee have, my dear? Thee's discouraged with thy father for choosing the thorny way which we tread with him, but thee seems no better satisfied with one who considers the flesh and its wants." "I don't know, mother, what I want for myself. That doesn't matter. But for thee I would have rest from all these cruel worries thee has borne so long." She buried her face in her mother's lap, and put her strong young arms about the frail, toil-bent form. "There, there, dear, try to rule thy spirit, Dorothy. Thee's too much worked up about this. They are not worries to me. I am thankful we have nothing to decide one way or the other, only to do our best with what is given us. Thee's not thyself, dear. Go downstairs and fetch in the clothes, and don't hurry. Stay out till thee gets more composed." Dorothy did not succeed in bringing herself into unity with her father's call, but she came to a fuller realization of his struggle. When he bade them good bye his face showed what it had cost him, but Rachel was calm and cheerful. The pain of parting is keenest to those who go, but it stays longer with those that are left behind. "Dorothy, take good care of thy mother," Friend Barton said, taking his daughter's face between his hands and gravely kissing her brow between the low-parted ripples of her hair. "Yes, father," she said, looking into his eyes. "Thee knows I'm thy eldest son." They watched the old chaise swing round the corner of the lane, then the pollard willows shut it from sight. "Come, mother," said Dorothy, hurrying her in at the gate. "I'm going to make a great pot of mush, and have it hot for supper, and fried for breakfast, and warmed up with molasses for dinner, and there'll be some cold, with milk for supper, and we shan't have any cooking to do at all." They went around by the kitchen door. Rachel stopped in the woodshed, and the tears rushed to her eyes. "Dear father, how he has worked over the wood, early and late, to spare us!" We will not revive Dorothy's struggle with the farm work and with the boys. They were an isolated family at the mill house. Their peculiar faith isolated them still more, and they were 12 miles from meeting and the settlement of Friends at Stony Valley. Dorothy's pride kept her silent about her needs, lest they might bring reproach upon her father among the neighbors, who would not be likely to feel the urgency of his spiritual summons. The summer heats came on apace, and the nights grew shorter. It seemed to Dorothy that she had hardly stretched out her tired young body and forgotten her cares in the low attic bedroom before the east was streaked with light and the birds were singing in the apple trees, whose falling blossoms drifted in at the window. One day in early June, Friend Barton's flock of sheep, consisting of 9 experienced ewes, 6 yearlings, and a sprinkling of close-curled lambs whose legs had not yet come into mature relations with their bodies, was gathered in a wattled enclosure beside the stream that flowed into the mill-head. It was supplied by the waste from the pond, and when the gate was shut, rambled easily over the gray slate pebbles, with here and there a fall just forcible enough to serve as a douche-bath for a well-grown sheep. The victims were panting in their heavy fleeces, and mingling their hoarse, plaintive tremulo with the ripple of the water and the sound of young voices in a frolic. Dorothy had divided her forces for the washing to the best advantage. The 2 elder boys stood in mid-stream to receive the sheep, which she, with the help of little Jimmy, caught and dragged to the bank. The boys were at work now upon an elderly ewe, while Dorothy stood on the brink of the stream braced against an ash sapling, dragging forward by the fleece a beautiful but reluctant yearling. Her bare feet were encased in a pair of moccasins that laced around the ankle, her petticoats were kilted, and her broad hat bound down with a ribbon. One sleeve was rolled up, the other had been sacrificed in a scuffle in the sheep pen. The new candidate for immersion stood bleating and trembling with her forefeet planted against the slippery bank, pushing back with all her strength, while Jimmy propelled from the rear. "Boys!" Dorothy's clear voice called across the stream. "Do hurry! She's been in long enough, now. Keep her head up, can't you, and squeeze the wool hard. You're not half washing. Oh, Reuby, thee'll drown her. Keep her head up." Another unlucky douse, and another half-smothered bleat. Dorothy released the yearling and plunged to the rescue. "Go after that lamb, Reuby," she cried with exasperation in her voice. Reuby followed the yearling, that had disappeared over the orchard slope, upsetting an obstacle in its path, which happened to be Jimmy. He was wailing now on the bank, while Dorothy, with the ewe's nose tucked comfortably in the bend of her arm, was parting and squeezing the fleece, with the water swirling round her. Her stout arms ached, and her ears were stunned with the incessant bleatings. She counted, with dismay, the sheep still waiting in the pen. "Oh, Jimmy, do stop crying, or else go to the house." "He'd better go after Reuby," said Shepherd Barton, who was now Dorothy's sole dependence. "Oh, yes, do, Jimmy, that's a good boy. Tell him to let the yearling go, and come back quick." The water had run low that morning in Evesham's pond. He shut down the mill, and strode up the hills across lots to raise the gate of the lower Barton pond, which had been heading up for his use. He passed the cornfield where, a month before, he had seen pretty Dorothy Barton dropping corn with her brothers. It made him ache to think of Dorothy with her feeble mother, the boys as wild as preachers' sons proverbially are, and the old farm running down on her hands. The fences all needed mending, and there went Reuben Barton, now, careering over the fields in chase of a stray yearling. His mother's house was big and lonely and empty, and he flushed as he thought of the one ewe lamb he coveted out of Friend Barton's rugged pastures. As Evesham raised the gate and leaned to watch the water swirl and gurgle through the trunk, sucking the long weeds with it, and thickening with its tumult the clear current of the stream, the sound of voices and the bleating of sheep came up from below. He had not the farming instincts in his blood. The distant bleating, the hot June sunshine and cloudless sky did not suggest to him sheep washing. But now came a boy's voice shouting, and a cry of distress, and he remembered with a thrill that Friend Barton used the stream for that peaceful purpose. He shut down the gate and tore along through the ferns and tangled grass, till he came to the sheep pen, where the bank was muddy and trampled. The prisoners were bleating drearily and looking with longing eyes across to the other side, where those who had suffered were now straying and cropping the short turf through the lights and shadows of the orchard. There was no other sign of life except a broad hat with a brown ribbon buffeted about in an eddy among the stones. The stream dipped now below the hill, and the current, still racing fast with the impetus he had given it, shot away amongst the hazel thickets that crowded close to the brink. He was obliged to make a detour by the orchard, and to come out below in the mill head, a black, deep pool with an ugly ripple setting across it to the head gate. He saw something white clinging there, and ran round the brink. It was the sodden fleece of the old ewe, which had been drifted against the head gate and held there to her death. Evesham, with a sickening contraction of the heart, threw off his jacket for a plunge, when Dorothy's voice called rather faintly from the willows on the opposite bank. "Don't jump, I'm here," she said. Evesham searched the willows, and found her seated in the sun just beyond, half buried in a bed of ferns. "I shouldn't have called thee," she said shyly, as he sank pale and panting beside her, "but thee I thought thee was going to jump into the mill head." "I thought you were there, Dorothy." "I was there quite long enough. Shep pulled me out. I was too tired to help myself much." Dorothy held her palm pressed against her temple, and the blood trickled from beneath, streaking her pale, wet cheek. "He's gone to the house to get me a cloak. I don't want mother to see me, not yet," she said. "I'm afraid you ought not to wait, Dorothy. Let me take you to the house, won't you? I'm afraid you'll get a deadly chill." Dorothy did not look in the least like death. She was blushing now, because Evesham would think it so strange of her to stay, and yet she could not rise in her wet clothes, that clung to her like the calyx to a bud. "Let me see that cut, Dorothy." "Oh, it's nothing. I don't wish thee to look at it." "But I will. Do you want to make me your murderer, sitting there in your wet clothes with a cut on your head?" He drew away her hand. The wound, indeed, was no great affair, but he bound it up deftly with strips of his handkerchief. Dorothy's wet curls touched his fingers and clung to them, and her eyelashes drooped lower and lower. "I think it was very stupid of thee. Didn't thee hear us from the dam? I'm sure we made noise enough." "Yes, I heard you when it was too late. I heard the sheep before, but how could I imagine that you, Dorothy, and 3 boys as big as cockerels were sheep washing? It's the most preposterous thing I ever heard of." "Well, I can't help being a woman, and the sheep had to be washed. I think there ought to be more men in the world when half of them are preaching and fighting." "If you'd only let the men who are left help you a little, Dorothy." "I don't want any help. I only don't want to be washed into the mill head." They both laughed, and Evesham began again entreating her to let him take her to the house. "Hasn't thee a coat or something I could put around thee until Shep comes?" said Dorothy. "He must be here soon." "Yes, I've a jacket here somewhere." He sped away to find it, and faithless Dorothy, as the willows closed between them, sprang to her feet and fled like a startled naiad to the house. When Evesham, pushing through the willows, saw nothing but the bed of wet crushed ferns and the trail through the long grass where Dorothy's feet had fled, he smiled grimly to himself, remembering that ewe lambs are not always as meek as they look. That evening Rachel had received a letter from friend Barton, and was preparing to read it aloud to the children. They were in the kitchen, where the boys had been helping Dorothy in a desultory manner to shell corn for the chickens; but now all was silence while Rachel wiped her glasses and turned the large sheet of paper, squared with many foldings, to the candle. She read the date, "London Grove, 5th month, 22nd. Most affectionately beloved." "He means us all," said Rachel, turning to the children with a tender smile. "It's spelled with a small b." "He means thee," said Dorothy, laughing. "Thee's not such a very big beloved." There was a moment's silence. "I don't know that the opening of the letter is of general interest," Rachel mused, with her eyes travelling slowly down the page. "He says, 'In regard to my health, lest thee should concern thyself, I am thankful to say I have never enjoyed better since years have made me acquainted with my infirmities of body, and I earnestly hope that my dear wife and children are enjoying the same blessing. I trust the boys are not deficient in obedience and helpfulness. At Shepherd's age I had already begun to take the duties of a man upon my shoulders." Shepherd giggled uncomfortably, and Dorothy laughed outright. "Oh, if father only knew how good the boys are! Mother, thee must write and tell him about their helpfulness and obedience. Thee can tell him their appetites keep up pretty well. They manage to take their meals regularly, and they are always out of bed by 8 o'clock to help me hang up the milking stool. Just wait till thee gets into the mill head again, Dorothy Barton. Thee needn't come to me to help thee out." End of Story 2, Part 1.